That fine fella right there is Adam Scher. We got an 8-game slate for you this evening after a 4-game early slate. And well, I guess Alex Baker will be back with us on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, as he always does. Adam and I go as a two-man crew Thursday and Friday. What do you think of this slate?
I think I'm pretty intrigued by it. The first slate we really, it was kind of limited pitching options. Obviously with there being only 8 of them. But this one, I'm pretty excited because you have Trevor Bauer in a good spot. But then you also have some ways that you can get creative. Not a whole lot of cheap pitching that you feel comfortable with, though.
Yeah, agreed. I discussed it with Jake on the strategy show this morning, and the bottom of the pitcher pool's kind of ugly. I was hoping that I might be a little bit different with some Tanner Roark, and then projections came out, and he was like third highest. So that's not going to happen. High owned Tanner Roark never feels great. Let's just jump right into it, though, man. We've got 8 games to talk about. We will start with Yankees and Tampa Bay. Let me ask you this first, though. Um, as far as this game goes, last I looked, and I'll just confirm right now. Yeah, there's still like I know Fantasy Cruncher says 6:30, but MLB.com, the MLB app, does not have a confirmed start time. It just says game two. Uh, right now they're in the bottom of the second, so it surely seems like we'll have no problem with this game going past 7:05, but there's no confirmed start time on it right now.
So that's only concerning to me in that hopefully the sites don't do something stupid and like cancel the slate.
Well, don't you remember what FanDuel did on this same thing about a couple months
Oh
ago?
yeah, yeah, that would be stupid too.
DraftKings
But
removed just the single game, which was fine. I think we'll be fine because it's second inning and it's 5:05 right now. So we've got 2 hours, and I doubt they're going to start immediately afterwards. But it's still
right,
worth talking about because I don't see a start time.
yeah, no, I mean that makes sense. Like my only concern, because I would be really surprised if they got this game going before 7:05.
Right.
My concern would just be like if they don't really confirm a start time and you have like issues with late swap or something, and then DraftKings just messes up. But that's obviously not anything that we'll know until it happens.
Right. Exactly. All right. Well, let's do it. Charlie Morton, uh, Chad Green as your opener. Do we have a verified long relief guy? Or are we going full bullpen here?
I have not seen anything. I'm trying to pull that up now, but I haven't seen anything.
Neither have I. Uh, I mean, is Sessa even still on the damn roster? He hasn't pitched since before the All Star break.
I'll say my guess would have been Sessa or who is the lefty? Cortez.
Cort-
If he's
Cortez.
still
Yeah, yeah. I forgot about Cortez as well. It could be, yeah, Nestor Cortez. Cortez last pitched on the 16th, but he pitched what he got one out, and he pitched. Well, he faced four batters, but he threw 20 pitches. Then the 13th, Sessa hasn't pitched since the fourth, so I don't know. One of them maybe. You might be right because Cortez has been a long guy, but whatever. Are you interested in Morton here or no? Even though he's been phenomenal, it's a tough matchup for sure.
Yeah, it's tough. Obviously a tough matchup. He's been one of the best pitchers, in baseball this season. Obviously one of the best pitchers on the slate, and the price tag has at least come down a bit, so it makes it a little bit appealing in tournaments to maybe get there at lower ownership. But the thing that'll probably keep me away is that Matt Boyd, who obviously we'll talk about later, is a very similar option in tournaments where, I think that if you're looking to get away from Bauer, you get someone that has a ton of talent. And he's even cheaper than Morton is, and he's not facing the Yankees. So outside of tournaments, definitely no interest in Morton. In tournaments, if I get to a little bit, I'm fine with that just because of how good he is. He has the second highest strikeout percentage on the slate. He has a top 10 PCRA among all qualified starters this year. So I don't mind getting to him. It's just that the matchup's really tough. You have Trevor Bauer for a little bit more in a great spot, and then you have a couple of other, top tier arms on the slate as well.
Right, exactly. Morton really, I feel like he's kind of almost flown under the radar with how good he's been this season. But
Because he's been a good pitcher for the last couple of years, but this year he's taking some steps forward, not walking quite as many guys, just doing a really good job. He increased his strikeout percentage against righties as well. He still has a higher strikeout percentage against lefties, but in the past there was a bigger disparity between the two. So yeah, he's been one of the better pitchers in baseball.
yeah, ever since he came to Houston, and started throwing that two-seam fastball last, which Garrett Cole did the same thing, and just look at the results. Um, Makes a big difference. Makes a really big difference. It's just hard to get there for all of the reasons you mentioned. I mean, it's funny because his last start, he struck out 10 Yankees. It's not like he can't put up really solid numbers. He's got 16 Ks in 9 2/3 innings against him this year. But I'm just not sure the risk is worth the reward here. What about batters from either side? Presumably Tampa, but it's kind of tough to know what we like, if anything, not knowing who's pitching.
Right. And the thing is that whoever comes in is probably a decent arm. The Yankees don't have the best bullpen or long guys, but they're not gas cans either.
Right.
So, I mean, if you, the Rays do have a 5.1 implied run total, they're reasonably priced. So I don't mind them as a full stack. But as far as one-offs go, I don't think there's a whole lot here that really get to all that much from the Tampa Bay side. And then from the Yankee side, obviously a really unappealing matchup against Morton, but it's the same thing that we've talked about the last couple of slates with the Yankees where they've been in tough spots. They're still a really talented offense. Like if you were to go hitter by hitter through the lineups tonight and just look at the ISO for every hitter, the Yankees are going to have one of the highest aggregated ISOs for any team on the slate, and they're really, really affordable. Looking at DraftKings pricing, Aaron Judge is the most expensive hitter on the team at $4,400. They still have a 5-run implied total, so it's not like Vegas has Morton really shutting them down. It's low for the Yankees, but I still have interest in them in tournaments, especially at these price tags.
All right. Let's talk about the next game here then. Cleveland and Detroit, Trevor Bauer, Matthew Boyd. Look, it's just a spectacular spot for Trevor Bauer and all of the numbers you'd look for in a starting pitcher with a high price point. He's got it, right? Lowest implied run total on the slate is this Detroit team against Bauer. He's got a 27.4% K rate on the season, but that K rate jumps above 30% against right-handed hitters. Not only that, but if there was ever a spot where your strikeout stuff is just far more pronounced, it's going to be against this Detroit team. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 righties in the lineup, and your lefties are Harold Castro, Victor Reyes, Kristen Stewart, and Goodrum. Maybe one of them is scary. It's really one of the most premier matchups in the league for a righty.
Yeah, and Bauer's trending in the right direction too. I mentioned in the deep dive article today. Normally, it's not something I look at all that much or at all, unless there's some type of pitch mix change or something like that. But in Bauer's case, I'm willing to give it a little bit of pay a little bit of attention to it just because he's got all the stuff to be one of the better pitchers in baseball. He was phenomenal in previous seasons, and then he really just kind of struggled out of the gate this year. So I'm a little optimistic that over his last 5 starts, he struck out 32.3%. His walks are down to 6.8%, still giving up a lot of barreled balls at 10.3% on balls in play. But outside of that, the numbers are trending in the right direction, in addition to him having a great matchup here. So, yeah, I mean, he's my number one pitcher in any format. I assume he'll be popular, but I don't really care.
Yeah, right now, 36% projected ownership on FanDuel, 33 on DraftKings, and 52 on Yahoo. That is the highest, not only pitcher, but overall player on all three sites for good reason. Matthew Boyd on the other side. I told Jake this earlier today. If I could get some Cleveland bats at a discount, I'm not necessarily interested in stacking them, but Boyd has allowed a good amount of home runs this season. And you see that a lot with these lefties, particularly lefties that against righties are getting only 33% ground balls. But 1.5 home runs per 9 to righties this year, it's clearly not a great spot. He's a very good pitcher. But if you're getting on sites where some of these bats are cheap and you need one or two of them, getting that solo shot of that stray home run against Boyd isn't out of the question. It's just, how do you prioritize them against Boyd on an 8-gamer?
Right. And Lindor is the one that really sticks out to
Yeah,
me
way
because
too cheap.
shortstop's not the best position tonight. You have Alex Bregman, you have Trey Turner, both in good spots. But outside of that, shortstop's not great. So Lindor at 4,400 on DraftKings in particular is a really nice price tag, even though Boyd is really good. Like you said, he is one of these pitchers that has, he's been great this year, but he has an elevated barrels per batted ball percentage, which means that at least when you do put the ball in play, you have a decent chance at doing some damage. So that being said, though, Boyd, I really, really like. I haven't projected as the second highest scoring pitcher on the slate. The downside for Boyd is that the Indians have one of the lowest strikeout percentages against left-handed pitching this season, but they're not a great offense. They're league average offense. It's just they don't strike out a lot. But Boyd has the highest K minus BB percentage on this entire slate. He has the highest strikeout percentage. He's tied for the lowest walk percentage. He's been one of the best pitchers in baseball in pretty much any metric that you look at this year. And you're getting him at $9,600 on DraftKings, $39 on Yahoo. That really jumps off the page for a pitcher that good. And then even at 9,800 on FanDuel, he's still $1,000 less expensive than Bauer. So I have Bauer ahead of Boyd, but with a 5.1 implied run total for the Indians, I don't think it would be surprising if Boyd goes a little bit overlooked on this slate, especially because people are going to want to go to Syndergaard. They're going to want to go to Bumgarner. Boyd is just head and shoulders better than both of those pitchers. Obviously, they have things working in their favor with where they're pitching and stuff like that. But just in terms of talent, Boyd is far and away the best pitcher out of that group, and he's probably going to be the lowest on.
All right, fair enough. Which site's your favorite for Boyd?
Yahoo, he's $39.
Okay, yeah, that's insane. Do you have any interest in Cleveland bats?
Only for the reasons that you said. We already talked about.
I know you mentioned Lindor. I'm sorry, but I meant if there was anybody else that stood out to you, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's nobody that stands out, but like you said, if you get some one-offs, it's fine because it is favorable hitting conditions. It is a 5.1 implied run total, and it is a pitcher in Boyd that when you are able to make contact, hitters can do some damage. So they're not guys that I'm prioritizing, but certainly have some upside as one-offs.
That's where I'm at too. Yeah, you're not putting them at the top of the list, but I'm not writing them off either. If a Lindor or Mercado falls into my lineup. So I think that's probably the way to look at it. Plus, Mercado has looked really good. And I'm assuming no interest in Detroit.
No.
Cincinnati and St. Louis, Tanner Roark, Dakota Hudson. I went on a big spiel about it on the strategy show. Roark's been awful against lefties to the point where even his expected rates, like his WOBA is 414, his xWOBA is 412. His ISO is 247. His X-ISO is 247. And his swinging strike rate's below 9%. Like, really bad numbers. Against righties, however, Tanner Roark's actually been really good. And you just look, 27% strikeouts, only 5% walks. 250 WOBA, 334 xFIP, and less than half a home run allowed per nine. It's night and day. And it has been for pretty much all season. Now you've got, the thing is with some of the injuries, you've got only 1, 2, 3, 4, you got 5 righties, but your lefties, and this is where I'll throw it to you, are Tommy Edman, who I think is a very good play leading off.
Down. It's not as, like you said, it's not as predominantly right-handed as it used to be, but you also got rid of Marcelo Ozuna. You got rid of Yadier Molina. So that's not necessarily a negative overall. There are some strikeouts here as well. It is a tough park to pitch in. Roark really does struggle with lefties, like you said. It's a fair price point. So right now we have him on DraftKings projected to be the third highest owned pitcher at 24% behind Bauer and Bumgarner. I don't know that I'd get to that much ownership on him, but I'll certainly get there just because when you look at the mid-range options, I think it's pretty much Roark and Kyle Gibson as the two that kind of stand out to me. And then beyond that, there's nothing.
Yeah, that's kind of the issue, which is why I was, thinking I'd really like Roark, but he's and not everywhere, of course, not across the board. But right now, 24% on DraftKings is quite high. I guess, well, we'll get to Bumgarner and Syndergaard, and we'll discuss that. But, I mean, you've got Merrill Kelly and Dakota Hudson getting ownership too. So, if you were to tell me that, you wanted to pay up a little bit more for Tanner Roark, I'm certainly not going to blame you for that when the alternatives are the guys that we've talked about. But I also think, well, you know what? I guess I'll ask you about Hudson before we go forward with bats.
The price tag's appealing. Not a whole lot else is appealing. Again, tough park to pitch in. 5.3 implied run total for Cincinnati. Not a lot of strikeouts for Dakota Hudson, regardless of what side of the plate you hit from. He's been effective against right-handed hitters, 290 expected WOBA, 104 expected ISO, but just a 60.4% strikeout percentage against righties, 17.5% against lefties. And he's another guy with a 400 expected WOBA, 200 expected ISO against left-handed hitters. So with three lefties in the top five in Winker, Votto, and Scooter Gennett, plus two righties that have, are just good hitters in Suarez and Puig, it's still a really dangerous matchup. So, at 5,800, I could see if he ends up in, like sprinkled into some lineups, but he's certainly not someone that I'm overly interested in. I would rather roster Roark than Hudson, even factoring in the price.
So would I. What about hitters, Adam? I mentioned Edman. I think leading off, that's a very great, solid, and viable option. I also am not going to overlook Winker in the leadoff spot. Jeanette batting fifth. Their prices have come up a little bit, but they're still pretty favorable. Unfortunately, Dietrich isn't in the lineup. A Cincy stack could have looked a whole lot more appealing if you had four lefties in the top five. But your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, like you said, it would have been much more appealing with Dietrich in there, but I still think that both sides are appealing for a couple of reasons. For one, the ballpark is great for home runs. The hitting conditions are favorable. Roark, he's really good against righties, like you said, but the righties in this lineup do have power with Martinez, Goldschmidt, O'Neill, and DeYoung. Like if Roark doesn't have his best stuff, they can make him pay. And then on top of that, you just have cheap bats against a popular pitcher in great hitting conditions for the Cardinals. And then on the other side, you don't really have the leverage working in your favor, but still really cheap bats for a team with a 5.3 implied run total on a slate where, for the first time in a while, we don't have anything over six. Or even close to six. I don't think. So it's it's one of the higher implied run totals on the slate for a team that outside of Suarez and Puig doesn't have a single hitter above $4,000.
Yeah, exactly. Um, that changes things for sure. Anything else on this game before we keep going?
Just to reiterate that you're prioritizing left-handed bats.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? It does. A lot of times, I think people worry too much about the platoon advantage in
Yep.
certain spots. But in this one, I mean, and it's not to say that Hudson or Roark can't give up power to both sides, but they are, I mean, significantly worse against opposite-handed hitters.
Yeah, normally it's pretty unusual to see platoon advantages that wide or platoon or splits that wide. But
Right,
both of these guys have massive ones,
for sure.
and neither one is a supremely talented pitcher where you're just like, yeah, but they're still really good. They'll probably come back. Like if anything, I would expect that their splits get closer together, and it's because they start giving up more to righties.
Right. Yeah, I could see it. I mean, we do know though that, uh, especially, well, I mentioned that today. Think about how weird Cincinnati is outside of maybe Luis Castillo. That all of these guys, all of these righties are so much worse against lefties. Whether it's Tyler Mahle, Anthony DeSclafani, Tanner Roark, it's an
Not Sonny
epidemic.
Gray.
What?
I said except for Sonny Gray.
Oh yeah, right. Well, as I said, Gray and Castillo, but
Yeah.
three of the five are horrible against lefties. And thank
Yeah,
you.
they just kind of it's like the Phillies. They just run the same guy out there with a different name.
Yeah, exactly what it is. No question. All right, let's get to Atlanta and Washington, Strasburg, and Julio Teheran. Now, by the way, actually, wait a second.
Kyle Wright.
Kyle Wright. This is so Kyle Wright was originally scheduled. Then he was scratched this morning. Now he's starting again.
He was scrapped. I'd seen Tehran scheduled last night.
7:18. Wright was scratched from his scheduled turn Wednesday. Um,
Wednesday was
oh,
yesterday.
no, I'm an idiot anyway. He was scratched from his AAA start and was expected to be called to start Thursday. Yeah, I'm good at reading. Uh, yeah, okay, whatever. It's funny because a few sites had Tyrann listed, so then I kind of just went with it. But yeah, Strasburg, Kyle Wright, my fault there, fellas. What do you make of this one? And we've talked about how Strasburg oddly has had really decent or solid success against Atlanta for a large part. But again, how do you prioritize that over Bauer?
Yeah, the Strasburg spot's really comparable to the Morton spot, in my opinion. It's a really tough matchup. It's a really good pitcher. Strasburg's another one who has really good numbers against righties and lefties this year. He has one of the highest strikeout percentages on the slate, one of the best PCRAs on the slate. He's a really good pitcher, but outside of just trying to get to a really good pitcher at low ownership, it's tough to really get to a lot of Strasburg because he's facing the Braves in Atlanta in 90-degree weather, and the ball's going to carry. Atlanta does have a relatively low implied run total at 4.5, but it's not like you're getting a huge discount on Strasburg. He's only $500 less than Bauer on DraftKings. He's $3 less on Yahoo. So essentially, you're just choosing to play Steven Strasburg against the Braves instead of Trevor Bauer against the Tigers. And that's something that doesn't work out all that often. So I would need to get him at really low ownership.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And well, he is going to be at really low ownership last I looked.
So I would need to get him at really low ownership, and I would need Bauer to be at much higher than like 30% ownership.
Yeah, actually, we said the exact same thing earlier. He is way less owned than him, but it's not like, I mean, Bauer's at 33%, which on this slate actually seems low.
Right. And the other part of that is so Bauer's at 33%, which I agree is low. Strasburg's at 8, which is really nice. Matt Boyd's at 11. Matt Boyd's having an even better year than Strasburg. And on DraftKings, he's $900 less. On Yahoo, he's $9 less. So you're getting a similarly talented pitcher in a difficult spot, not as bad as the Braves, but still a difficult spot, at similar ownership and an even lower price tag. So it just makes it really tough for Strasburg to get in there.
Agreed. Um, okay, then that makes sense. What are your thoughts on this Washington team? Looking at totals here, you've got, like you said, nothing above 5.6 and 5.1 for Washington against Kyle Wright. For what it's worth, Atlanta at 4.5 against Strasburg. That kind of shows you how much totals have risen, like, and obviously how good Atlanta is. But last year you wouldn't have seen 4.5 for Atlanta. Oh, and by the way, is the sweat narrative in play for you? It's 88 degrees in Atlanta.
That's not something that is backed up by anything except for when he happens to have a bad start and people tweet about it.
You don't have it
Uh,
worked in your projections?
I do not.
Oh,
Dylan Bundy maybe, but not Strasburg.
oh, okay.
But yeah, I mean, if you want to get to some Atlanta, they're obviously a really good team. But appealing part of this game to me is the Nats. I would like them more if Tehran were still pitching because he's just bad. Kyle Wright is a prospect for Atlanta. He hasn't had a ton of success in the majors before, but still just 23 years old. He has a 50% ground ball percentage at AAA this year, combined with a 14.8% infield fly ball percentage. Those are both really good numbers. That means that basically 2/3 of balls in play against him are very unproductive batted balls, but not an elite strikeout percentage at 22.6%. And obviously, he's facing a better collection of hitters here than he faces at AAA. No Howie Kendrick in the lineup, no Matt Adams in the lineup also weakens the Nats. But I still think that Ryan Zimmerman's a top point per dollar option. Rendon and Soto are two of the top plays at their positions, as is Trey Turner.
All right. What else do you have on this game?
Um, Priority would be Soto from the Nats. From the Brave side, nothing really stands out. The pricing isn't really that appealing.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that. And Strasburg is still a good pitcher. Even if we don't have a lot of them, he's still a very strong pitcher. Uh, Minnesota and Oakland, Mike Fiers, Kyle Gibson. Dude, I know their prices have come down. Gibson is one of the most boom or bust pitchers we've seen. His floor is not high. He struggles to work deep into games on many occasions. It's really hard to make much of Kyle Gibson. And to me, honestly, analytics or, in stats, you and I dive deep into him every day. But honestly, sometimes I feel like with Gibson, it's just close your eyes and click and hope you picked him on the right day. Seriously, he's got good stuff, but there's really nothing anymore to indicate whether or not he's going to have a good game. I swear to God.
Yeah, I thought I was going to have him projected a little bit higher today than I do. There are a couple of things working in his favor here, in addition to the $6,800 DraftKings price tag. No Matt Chapman in the lineup, so that takes out one of the best hitters on Oakland. Still only 3 left-handed bats with Robbie Grossman, Matt Olson, and Jurickson Profar. Against righties this year, Gibson has about a 25.5% strikeout percentage compared to 21.8% against lefties. So that works in his favor. The thing is that for a team with as much power as Oakland has, they still don't strike out a lot. They're in the bottom 2/3 of the league in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching. And so it's still not an ideal matchup. I don't think that he's really any worse than Tanner Roark, and I think Roark's going to have a lot more ownership. So I have some interest in Gibson in tournaments, but like you said, he's a really frustrating guy to roster. He should be much better than he is. It's not a great matchup, but we're just kind of like digging for mid range value on this slate.
Yeah, there isn't a lot of it either. I mean, what are your thoughts on Mike Fiers going up against? Oh, and by the way, just to be clear about all this, Oakland is a very low strikeout team this season. They've really fixed that to a large extent. Lefties, they don't strike out at all. Righties, they strike out at a bottom 7 clip, bottom 6. Uh, so, I mean, Gibson can go out there and have a strong game. We've seen him do it against good teams. We've also seen him have horrible games against bad teams. So, again, he's. Would you agree? Really, the only thing here is that Gibson's cheap on a night where there isn't a lot of cheap pitching that's viable.
Yeah, and I think that the Oakland lineup does set up as good as you're going to get for Gibson, just because they do have the 6 righties in there, and because there's no Matt Chapman.
What about Mike Fiers? He seems to be the. It seems to be that you just can't stop this guy recently, even though he can't miss a single bat.
Yeah, this is a pretty terrifying spot for him. He gets out of Oakland, so he gets to a park that plays better for power, doesn't have the massive foul ball territory to bail him out on foul balls, and he's pitching in 88 to 90-degree weather. You very rarely get weather like that in Oakland. So not only is it a better park for hitters, but it's better hitting weather than he's typically going to pitch in at home. He doesn't miss bats. He's facing a Minnesota team that has, last I checked, the highest ISO against right-handed
Yep.
pitching in baseball. That could have changed, but even if it did, they're one of the highest.
Their
So
ISO on the season on their active roster is 228. It is easily the highest.
yeah, so I mean that obviously is good. It's not the best lineup. You don't have Eddie Rosario. You don't have Byron Buxton. Instead, you have Jake Cave. You have Adrianza. But other than that, I mean, you did get Mitch Garver up there hitting second. That's a catcher with some pop. You have Cruz, Kepler, Gonzalez, Crone, Sano's in the lineup. So there's still a lot of power in this lineup for a pitcher that strikes out about 17% of hitters and gives up a lot of fly balls. So I'm getting the less Fiers than I am Gibson or Rower.
All right. What about bats from here? Minnesota, like you said, it's not a perfect park. It's pretty neutral, but it's way better than Oakland.
Yeah, I like the Minnesota bats. For Oakland, I like Matt Olson in particular. The lefty righty matchup against Gibson. Like I said, Gibson gives up a bit more power to lefties. He strikes lefties out less. It's a ballpark boost for Olson. He's just a really good hitter. And then I think you still have to mention Chris Davis just because he's hitting terribly, but he's $3,500 on DraftKings.
All right. LA, Angels, Houston, Astros, Wade Miley, Matt Harvey. Yeah, Miley's been a good back of the rotation guy this season. He really has. From a fantasy standpoint, he's been mediocre, sometimes decent, but he's been pretty decent all around in terms of preventing runs. I do wonder though, like, are we going to start seeing him start to be a little bit more vulnerable in terms of some home runs? He gave up 3 in Globe Life last time out. He's given up 19 or 17 on the season, which isn't really a low amount. I'm curious to know, does Wade Miley sustain this production? To be fair, he wasn't even bad last year, but this seems like he's been really good this year.
Yeah, I mean, I buy into him being a guy that does a pretty good job of limiting production overall, just because his improvements have coincided with him really relying on the cutter that he throws now. He doesn't get a lot of swings and misses. He's still not a strikeout guy, but to righties this year, he's allowed a 176 ISO, a 140 expected ISO, 282 expected WOBA. And like you said, it's not like it's just this year either. So I do think he's pretty legitimately good at not getting blown up, but it's also not a good matchup here. He is expensive, more expensive than Rower, more expensive than Gibson, facing an Angels team that does not strike out. We don't know yet if Mike Trout will be in the lineup. Obviously, that it's going. But either way, it's not going to be a great strikeout spot. You do still have some nice price tags on the Angels as well, with Justin Upton in particular at 4K, most likely hitting cleanup. So he stands out a little bit. But for the most part, I'm not interested in Miley or the Angels all that much.
Neither am I. Um, I feel like that. I always feel that way when it comes to Miley, but this Angels team just isn't a great one to stack. Like, and you kind of touched on it, but uh, the way that it's set up isn't great. And by the way, do we even know if Mike Trout's going to play?
No, still listed as questionable. So like if he's out, it's just one less Angels bat that I would be interested in using as a one off.
We don't have a Houston lineup yet, but one thing we know about Matt Harvey, he is another pitcher that has struggled mightily against lefties ever since he lost that fastball velocity and stopped being, uh, well, the Dark Knight. That was the nickname, right?
Yep.
14% walk rate this year, 17% strikeouts, um, monster power allowed to lefties. Granted, it's not a huge sample, but if you wanted to go back to 2017 until now, you'd get the same exact results. And I don't believe that much has changed. Uh, Righties, he's still not good. He's just not as bad. Uh, the thing is, there aren't a ton of lefties in this Houston lineup. There is a lot of power, though. Uh, what are your thoughts on the Astros here at Angel Stadium?
Yeah, I mean they're one of my favorite stacks here. I don't think that they're sneaky. I just think it's a really good spot against Harvey. Hopefully, we actually get Brantley and Alvarez in the lineup here. The Astros have been really frustrating lately with only rostering one of them or only putting one of them into the lineup. But hopefully, we get both because they both be they're each one of my favorite hitters on the slate in this spot against Harvey. Alvarez a little bit more expensive, but a bunch more power than Brantley. Brantley just a really good hitter. But the reason I like Houston so much also is that on top of those two, you just still get really good hitters. And like you said, Harvey's not good against righties. He's just less bad than he is against lefties. So getting Springer, Altuve's price tag went from 4,600 on DraftKings yesterday back to 4,200 today. He homered and stole a base yesterday. I guess that broke the algorithm. So he's really cheap again. Bregman's still less than 5K. You can still get to the top part of the Astros lineup relatively easily, but then you also still get some upside at the bottom with a $3,400 Robinson Chirinos at catcher who is a very flawed hitter but has plenty of power. He's $12 on Yahoo, which is reasonable as well. Josh Reddick is affordable at 36 on DraftKings, 14 on Yahoo. There's a lot of ways to stack Houston outside of the obvious, top five.
Yeah. I mean, where would you prioritize them as far as stacks go on this 16 team slate where, as much as we've talked already, we're through 6 games, there isn't a whole lot to love?
They're my number one stack in Cruncher right now. I
Okay.
haven't sorted anything, so it's possible that if their ownership ends up being really high by lock, that I come in, low, that they don't end up being my number one stack. But right now, looking at the stack tool on Awesemo.com, they have the highest top stack percentage by a lot. They're at 13% on DraftKings, 11.5 on FanDuel, 11.9 on Yahoo. The only other team in double digits is the Twins at 10.3 on Yahoo specifically and on FanDuel. On DraftKings, they're the only team in double digits. So we have them and the Nats as the two highest owned stacks, but Houston still, exceeding their 10% aggregate ownership. I just think it's a really good spot for them. I think that they, at least the way it looks right now, probably don't come in as highly owned as they should, especially when you consider what I talked about before with being able to get to the bottom of the lineup. I think there's a good chance that Bregman's really popular and Altuve's really popular, but then if you go to like a Gurriel or a Chirinos or a Reddick, you get a pretty significant drop off in ownership.
Yeah. I feel like even now, I think you mentioned it, but their ownership is still lower than the top stack percentage.
Yeah, and it's not even like it's sometimes like when we get cores, you still have to just keep in mind what the ownership is. Like if
Right.
if
When
the
they're
Rockies have a 30,
20%, it's still 20%.
right, yeah, it's still 10,000 teams that have
Right.
exposure to this team. But that's not the case here. If they're going to come in at 10% aggregate, and you have to keep in mind that that's a result of guys like Altuve pulling it up. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's 10% of the field has 5-man Astro stacks. So I'll as of right now, I would be getting there a lot.
All right, man. I agree with you, and I kind of don't see many great alternatives. Um, I I think. Do you think that going to the bottom of the order? I think you touched on it a bit, but do you think that going to the bottom of the order could be a way to get some leverage here, or is it not necessary to do like a bottom of the order stack?
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why Houston is my favorite stack right now. And it's because, you could do a full bottom of the order, like you said. Like if you went from your like if we assume that Alvarez, Gurriel, Reddick, Chirinos, and then either Marisnik or Straw is the bottom of the order, that gives you a bunch of power and salary relief. Like Alvarez has a ton of power, Chirinos has power, Reddick is fine, Gurriel is fine. And then even Marisnik has power. He's just strikes out a ton. So even if you went there, like you have a much lower owned version of the Houston stack that isn't particularly bad. And you don't have to stack guys consecutively either. I mean, if you go like Springer, Bregman, Alvarez, Chirinos, Reddick, or something, you're getting salary relief from Reddick and Chirinos. You're getting power from Springer, Bregman, and Alvarez. And it's still a lower owned version of the stack because you don't have Altuve or you don't have Brantley or you don't have both or whatever. There's just a lot of ways to use the bottom of the Houston lineup to create contrarian stacks while still being on one of the best spots on the slate.
For sure. Anything else from this game?
The only thing that I guess I don't like about Houston is that it is one of the worst weather spots as far as hitting goes. Like it's only supposed to be around 75 in Los Angeles, which isn't really surprising. But you have 90 degrees and humid and so many other spots on the slate that that's a little bit unappealing. But outside of that, it's still Matt Harvey. It's still a really good Houston team.
All right. Let's move it on here. 2 games to go. Awesemo.com. You see us on YouTube all the time, but if you haven't checked the site out yet, you can get 50% off your first month of Awesemo Plus subscription by simply using the sign-up code DEEPERDIVE, all one word, DEEPERDIVE, to get access to the top stack tool that Adam just mentioned, the ownership projections that we reference all the time, the player projections, all of which have been built, developed, and used daily by the man himself, whose name is on the site, Alex Baker, Awesemo, who joins us Monday through Wednesday on the Deeper Dive. He uses those tools every single day. There's the lineup builder. There's a Fantasy Cruncher add-on. There's the articles from Adam and myself and Jake and Josh. A lot of free content as well if you're not yet ready to take the plunge. We're continuing to pump out a ton of seasonal fantasy football information. It's some great stuff. Myself and Spags and Nolan Kelly and Ben Rasa, we've all been working really hard on that stuff, and I think you'd like it. For anyone that's still doing their seasonal leagues, which is probably most of you, check it out before doing your draft. Of course, Adam's Deep Dive, him and I rotate every other day. So much more, and plenty of free content like the Spotlight Hitters, Spotlight Pitchers, and all of that good stuff. All of that over at Awesemo.com. Remember, sign up code DEEPERDIVE, one word, get 50% off your first month. All right, Arizona, Milwaukee, Kenneth Merrill Kelly, actually, and Zach Davies. Go ahead, man. Throw this one right over to you without any setup.
This pitching sucks, but the roof is closed, and they're both cheap. Both of these teams actually have implied run totals slightly below 5, which is weird. So maybe I'll get some on this slate just because in my initial crunch, I was getting around 15% of both. But the important thing to keep in mind there is that I have pretty low exposure caps. So that doesn't mean that I expect to get 15% of both of these guys in tournaments. Once I decide what lineups I'm playing, it's pretty likely that I end up lower than that. But for Zach Davies, neither one of these guys are strikeout pitchers. Zach Davies faces a Arizona team that doesn't strike out a lot, but that is an average to slightly below average offense against right-handed pitching. And he's only 5,300 with the roof closed. It should be a little bit more favorable pitching conditions than Davies' home park as well. So, I would rather roster a $5,300 Davies than a $4,800 Harvey. And then on the other side, Kelly's been a bit better than Davies this year. Kelly has a 4.79 xFIP, 18.5% strikeout percentage. Davies has a 15.7% strikeout percentage, a 5 flat xFIP. So, Kelly's been bad. Davies has been worse. But Kelly also has to face a Milwaukee lineup that, maybe gives a little bit more strikeout upside than Diamondbacks, but also is just full of better hitters than the Diamondbacks have. So, having to contend with guys like Kane, Yelich, Grantall, Moustakas, Keston Hiura, Eric Thames, most likely. It's a pretty deep and dangerous Milwaukee lineup. So it's not like it's an appealing spot for Merrill Kelly. It's not like you're getting a 6K Kelly facing the White Sox or the Tigers or something like that. it's the only reason I would get exposure to him is kind of just like a product of the slate. Like I have Kelly projected for 11.3 DraftKings points. I have Davies at 10.2. That makes them both really, really poor, like raw point plays, but kind of decent point per dollar options. So they might end up just in some lineups where I'm looking to pay up for bats and the pitcher.
Okay. Now, what would be your favorite spots from this specific game? We just talked a lot about pitching. Is there anything you really like from this game?
The Milwaukee Bats would be my favorite spot. Like I said, they have some strikeouts in their lineup, but Merrill Kelly doesn't take advantage of that. Against lefties in particular this year, he's only struck out 15.7%. Against righties, he struck out 21.1%. But against righties, he's allowed a 226 expected ISO. Against lefties, he's allowed a 145 actual ISO and a 309 actual WOBA. But his expected WOBA is 361 and his expected ISO is 193. So you're getting a pitcher that doesn't strike lefties out and looks like he's been getting pretty lucky in his ability to limit production against them. And now he's going to have to face most likely Christian Yelich, Grandal, Moustakis, and Eric Thames, all within the top six. So I think that those guys make for a pretty interesting mini stack, full stack, one offs, any of the above.
Okay. Favorite overall bat from this game?
So Yelich because of talent or Grandal because of position. Obviously, when you can get power at catcher, it's at a premium. Whereas in the outfield, there's a million ways you can go. So Grandal would probably be the one that I get the most.
All right. Yeah. I mean, this is one of those Milwaukee. I don't think we have an actual lineup yet, do we?
We don't.
Yeah. Because, sitting here wondering well, actually, no, he's fine. Never mind. I guess we're good here. Yeah, there isn't much to worry about. But
It's also a spot where paying up for Milwaukee might be a little bit contrarian. Right now, in the top stack tool, we have them
5%
on.
ownership, 7% top stack on DraftKings.
Oh, so I guess I hadn't updated because I did a 7% ownership.
Yeah, it just updated a couple minutes ago.
Okay. Yeah. So it's a spot where I do think that if you go there, you probably are a little bit contrarian because you have to pay up for Yelich, or I mean, you don't have to, but you have Yelich you can pay up for. Keston Hiura is a little bit overpriced at 5K, but he has a ton of power. So it's not a good point per dollar play, but it's one of the top raw point second base options.
Yeah, I agree.
So,
Ninth
yeah.
highest ownership among all teams, which is not very high.
Yeah, it makes them pretty appealing in tournaments. That Alex isn't here, so I guess we can use this one as the anti-optimizer play.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, though. This could be a good, solid AOS. So keep that in mind. So, okay, last one here, unless there's anything else, but I think we touched on all of it. San Francisco, New York Mets, we could spend a little time on this one. Noah Syndergaard, Madison Bumgarner. Right now, as far as ownership goes, Bumgarner and Syndergaard, 28 and 23% on DraftKings. On FanDuel, Bumgarner and Syndergaard are 18 and 15%, second and third highest owned, second and fourth highest owned on DraftKings. I forgot to mention that. And then on Yahoo, Bumgarner, second highest owned, not only pitcher but player, 48% at 36. And then Noah Syndergaard, $43, 25%. So two of your highest owned pitchers are in the same game at Oracle Park. Let's go ahead and just dive right into this one.
It was painful for me to write about this game. It's painful for me to talk about it. I think the way that Emac phrased it on the Early Bird podcast last night was that he was looking forward to watching this show and you bringing them up and watching me gouge my eyes out because I had to recommend both of Syndergaard and Bumgarner at the same time.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
What am I, a sadist?
two of my least favorite pitchers in DFS, but obviously really, really good pitching conditions here in San Francisco. Weather is supposed to be less than 60 degrees. It's a great park for pitchers, obviously. The Mets have been really productive against left-handed pitching this year, but the park should help to mitigate some of that. Bumgarner's numbers, not surprisingly, are much better at home than on the road. He's allowed 1.1 home runs per nine at home compared to 1.56 on the road. He has a strikeout percentage up over 26% at home. His WOBA is like 50 or 60 points lower in Oracle as well. So 287 WOBA at home, 341 WOBA allowed on the road. Everything just is better at home for Bumgarner, and that's how we would expect it to be. So on the slate where you do have a pretty weak mid range, it's not like there is a ton of opportunity cost there. Even if you get a good outing from someone like a Tanner Roark or Kyle Gibson, it's really unlikely that they give you a good enough outing that you're like in trouble if you don't have them. So opportunity cost is pretty much non-existent. There's not a bunch of like boomer bust high upside guys, and that makes both of these pitchers more appealing. On the other side, Syndergaard has the more favorable matchup in terms of run prevention. The Giants are a below average offense. They have a lot of good hitters in their lineup, but they also have a lower strikeout percentage than the Mets do. And one thing that stands out about Syndergaard is that in previous seasons, he was always someone who seemed to get a bit unlucky because he's always had issues with command, and it's led to some issues with higher than normal batting average on balls in play. But the strikeouts were always there. It was just a matter of like sequencing, and he would have what seemed like more unlucky starts than he should because guys would get on base, they'd steal, he'd give up a bloop single, and there's a run. This year, the strikeout percentage has come down. His xFIP has gone up. His career xFIP is 3.12. This season, it's 4.05. His career strikeout percentage is 26.4%. This year, he's at 23.4. So he's dropped 3 full points on his strikeout percentage. So now all of a sudden, you have a pitcher who still has some of the same issues that he's had in the past with command and everything, but he's not striking guys out like he used to. And now he's facing a San Francisco team that doesn't strike out a ton. So all that being said, basically it's two flawed pitchers that are in optimal pitching conditions. In Syndergaard's case, he faces a San Francisco team that isn't particularly dangerous, but doesn't strike out a lot. In Bumgarner's case, he faces a Mets team that is dangerous, but will strike out. And you just kind of hope that some of their power is taken away by the fact they're in San Francisco.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I guess the question now is, as far as your ownership goes right now, how much of each do you have, and where do they rank among your top pitchers?
I would expect I end up similar to the field on them. In my initial fantasy crunch, I got 26% Bumgarner, 22% Syndergaard. Again,
So
that's
you're coming in
not
right around the field right now
right, but again, that's not indicative of where I'll actually end up.
because you're
Like
going
for
to
example,
sort. Yeah.
I got 29% Bauer because that's where I capped him, just to try and get a variety of lineups to choose from. I fully expect that I'll end up with much more than 29% Bauer. The I would guess that if ownership stays as it currently is, that I'll end up a bit underweight on Bumgarner and Syndergaard, but still getting to them, probably like 15% or something like that. And then I'll just end up overweight on Matt Boyd because, right now we have Bumgarner and Syndergaard projected for more than double the ownership of Boyd. Um, Boyd on DraftKings is $400 more than Syndergaard and 600 more than Bumgarner. I have Boyd projected for 2.1 points more than Syndergaard and 1.1 point more than Bumgarner. So once I sort my lineups and take into account ownership, I think I'll have a lot of like Boyd lineups start kind of rising at the expense of the Bumgarner and Syndergaard lineups.
Do you have any interest in hitters?
Not a ton. You certainly can make a case for Pete Alonso at 4,500 on DraftKings. On Yahoo, he is $24, which is still pretty expensive. But he clearly has enough power to hit the ball out in San Francisco. The ball's not going to carry well, but it's not quite as bad a park for right-handed power as left-handed power. Bumgarner, does have some issues with righties, and Alonso is just a phenomenal hitter. So I think that he's a pretty reasonable option. But outside of that, I don't have a lot of interest in hitters here.
All right, so let's do this before we get to our top stacks. Uh, Outside of Trevor Bauer, and I know we just talked about Syndergaard and Bumgarner, who is your favorite mid-range guy if you had to go there? Is it Roark? Is it going because I think Roark probably from a raw projected fantasy points, it seems to be that would be the guy, but he is more expensive than the Davies and the Hudsons and the Kellys and the Gibsons. So let's say below 8K, Roark, Wright, Fires, Gibson, Kelly, Hudson, Davies, and Harvey. Who's your favorite pitcher from down here and two pitcher sites?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would be Roark. Like I have him at 14 and a half DraftKings points. I have Gibson next at 13.2. They're not that far apart in price, so I guess I'd have to give the edge to Roark if we're excluding ownership. Um, if we're factoring ownership in, I think the most likely outcome would probably be that I end up a little bit over Gibson's projected, 13% and a little under Roark's projected 24%. But they're my two favorite, mid-range guys. Like I don't love either one, but I still feel better about both of them than I do about either of the guys in the Arizona game, and certainly better than I do about Matt Harvey.
And if you feel compelled to pay a premium for hitters, say you're stacking the Brewers, who are really expensive, and you got to go down to one of these guys, saying you're playing like a 10 max or a 3 max, and you're just building lineups, who is the cheapest pitcher you're willing to look at and throw into lineups?
Um, Probably Zach Davies. Looking at my initial crunch, I don't think I got any Harvey. If I did, it was like one or two lineups just to fill it out. But Davies seems like the one that I would kind of have to suck it up and play. But do keep an eye out on Yankees news because Nestor Cortez is 4K flat on DraftKings. He's certainly a spot you can go to if we get confirmation that he actually is going to pitch.
All right, top stacks. Who do you got, man?
Houston is just my favorite stack. I do think the Cardinals are a good stack because it's a great park for hitting. It's a popular pitcher for somewhat good reason. It's kind of this spot kind of reminds me of the same reasons why Arizona was a good stack last night. Obviously, not predicting that you have to roster the Cardinals to win the slate or anything like that. But like last night, Jesse Chavez was kind of just he's just a guy, but he was underpriced, and so that made him be popular. But he was in a park that was great for hitters, and it was still a really risky spot. It's kind of the same thing here. Tanner Roark's a better pitcher than Jesse Chavez is, but his ownership is going to be high tonight just because of a lack of other options, more so than because of the actual conditions for Roark. So whenever you get something like that, I look to get to the other side. But then here you also get the added bonus of a pretty cheap Cardinals team, great hitting conditions in Cincinnati, which is a great park for hitters. It's just kind of a natural. It's a spot that is really, really high upside for the opposing offense anyway. And then you factor in that you're getting a popular pitcher against them.
All right. I'll go to the others. By the way, I agree with the whole popular pitcher thing because it's not like Tanner Roark is some stud,
Right.
although he's been good at times. I'll go to the other side of this one. I really do wish, and I mentioned it, I really wish that Dietrich was in the lineup. This might be my favorite stack if he was batting in the middle of that order. I think it would have really opened things up. But you do have three lefties in the top five, and Suarez and Puig are no slouches. So I do like Cincinnati here. Any other teams? So we did, we discussed all of them and our favorite ones. Is there any other team that you say, you know what, this could be a really good leverage play? You mentioned Milwaukee, and we talked about Houston, not a leverage spot, of course.
Yeah.
What about maybe Arizona?
So I like Milwaukee, especially now that on the updated ownership projections, Merrill Kelly's up to 20%
Yeah,
on
that's a
DraftKings.
lot.
So that makes him appealing. One thing that I just kind of thought of. So we have the Yankees in the stack tool. We have the Yankees projected as the third highest top stack percentage, but they're also getting a lot of ownership. This is a spot where the ownership projections are kind of weird. It's weird because you're not going to have a Yankees lineup. And like as we saw the other night when there was a 14 and a half implied run total in cores and you got low cores ownership because the lineup didn't come out until after lock, people are really hesitant to go there. So the later the Yankees lineup comes out for the second game of that doubleheader, the lower their ownership naturally is going to be. And you just have a really, really cheap stack with a lot of upside at probably lower ownership than they otherwise would have.
All right, I like it. I guess that'll do it for us. As always, it's fun. Thanks for hanging out. Hit us with a thumbs up, like the video. If you do enjoy it, you want to help us out and support the channel, support the site. We appreciate it a lot, and it helps us out a ton. Also, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you always know when new content's going to drop. Stick around. We've got Jake. We've got Spags taking you up to lock. The Live Before Lock show's coming up after this on the YouTube Awesemo channel. You just click that link, and it'll take you there. Until tomorrow, good luck. Adam and I will see you back here on the Deeper Dive.